My name is Jill Phillips, and I'm the creator of Whose Shoes, a popular approach to co-production. I was named as an HSJ 100 wildcard and want to help give a voice to others, talking about their ideas and experiences. I'll be chatting with people from all sorts of different perspectives, walking in their shoes. If you are interested in the future of healthcare and like to hear what other people think, or perhaps even contribute at some point, Whose Shoes Wildcard is for you. So today I am fulfilling a pledge. If you look at the Purple Rainbow website, you can make pledges, #somethingforseth, as part of the legacy for Seth Goodburn, who sadly died of pancreatic cancer in 2014. My pledge was to invite his wife Lesley to share the story on the podcast, and I'm delighted to do so today. Lesley has done extraordinary work to raise awareness of this cruel disease and help so many other families going through the same experience. I have so far only ever talked to Lesley through our shared interest in improving patient experience through co-production. I was invited to present at one of the NHS England Experience of Care sessions as part of Lesley's wonderful Hope Network. This is my first ever conversation one-to-one with Lesley, and I'm really looking forward to it. This is a story of love and humanity, fundraising, connections, supporting improvement through narrative, including storytelling, and also making a play and a film. As you can hear already, there's so much synergy with my Whose Shoes work. So welcome to the Wildcard Whose Shoes podcast, Lesley. We're looking forward to hearing more about you and your beautiful relationship with Seth, and what you're doing to keep his memory alive and add so much purpose to your own life too.
Well, it's really good to meet you, Jill. Well, meet you virtually rather than face to face. It would be great to be in a room, but it's really good to have this opportunity to kind of share my experience, Seth's experience, how it kind of links to purpose and how it links to the work that I do voluntarily and professionally.
So it's a big story, isn't it, Lesley? Where would you like to start?
Yeah, if I start with Seth, maybe. Seth was a kind, curious, generous, loving man, but I would say that because I'm biased. We were married for 9.5 years. We married a little bit later in life. It was the second marriage for me and a first one for Seth. We had this lovely relationship where we were kind of open and honest. It was very much based on humour and practical jokes and understanding each other implicitly. Life was wonderful. We'd done lots of travelling. We'd booked a trip of a lifetime to China, Hong Kong and Singapore for our 50th birthdays that were coming up in 2014. It was going to be our 10th wedding anniversary, so the idea was that we'd go off to China, do the Great Wall, terracotta warriors, pandas at Chengdu, go down the Yellow River, end up in Hong Kong, come back through Singapore and just have a wonderful time. And that was all booked 6 weeks before Seth started to feel unwell. So for a little while he'd been a little bit odd. His demeanour had changed. He wasn't quite so jokey or so funny. He was tired a lot. He seemed quite depressed. But he was coming up to 50 and he knew that the job that he did in the utilities company was going to be outsourced to India. So he knew the following summer he was going to be made redundant from his job. So I kind of put this change in demeanour down to the fact that he was coming up to 50 and perhaps didn't want the stress of changing jobs. But as it turned out, actually, some of the lethargy and some of the change in demeanour and the depressed mood were actually hidden symptoms of pancreatic cancer. So from September 2013 through to his diagnosis in May 2014, there was just an oddness about Seth, a strange distance between us, a slightly depressed, under the weather person, which I put down to the fact he was about to be made redundant. In April 2014, towards the end of April, he got really breathless, went to the doctors, they gave him steroids, antibiotics, thought he'd got a chest infection, he got a little bit better, and then in May, he deteriorated again. He went to work on Monday, got an emergency doctor's appointment on the Monday evening, was referred directly to A&E, got a scan, having been admitted overnight, and the next day was told he'd got late-stage pancreatic cancer and he'd got days, maybe weeks to live. So other than these symptoms that he'd got that I put down to change of life, change of job, coming up to 50, there wasn't really anything that kind of jumped out until a couple of weeks before the diagnosis, where he got backache. He was struggling to eat, he had indigestion, he had real intense pain in the middle of his back, but he thought he'd pulled a muscle mowing the lawn. And that's pancreatic cancer, really, a disease that is really, really vague, that doesn't necessarily always manifest in explicit symptoms. Often it's kind of indigestion, backache, lethargy, weight loss, feeling unwell, maybe change in bowel habits, but it's different dependent where it is in the pancreas as well. So dependent where the tumour grows, the symptoms are different. 1 in 4 people diagnosed with pancreatic cancer sadly die within a month. 3 in 4 people die within a year.
It's really shocking, isn't it?
Absolutely. 45% of people are diagnosed at A&E, because in the kind of average lifespan of a GP, they may diagnose 1 person with pancreatic cancer. It's so rare to actually get the diagnosis at primary care because the symptoms are so vague. And people tend to go to and fro to the GP between 6 and 10 times before they actually get a referral to secondary care.
Are those statistics changing at all?
They've not changed in 50 years, sadly, Jill.
That's what I thought, yeah. And obviously that's where your work comes in, and Seth's legacy and the fantastic raising awareness.
They're down at the bottom of the pile in terms of cancer survival rates. Nothing really has changed, like half a percentage point in 50 years. So there's a real struggle out there to get healthcare professionals to recognise these vague symptoms and kind of link them together. So I don't want to frighten people and make people think that if they've got indigestion and backache, it's pancreatic cancer, because it probably isn't. But if there's something wrong with your digestive system and you're feeling tired and depressed and you've got backache and it doesn't really go away with normal treatments, then it's worth going to the GP, getting checked out. For every 10 people diagnosed, 1 person gets the chance of life-saving surgery, which is the only way of curing pancreatic cancer. 7 in 10 get no treatment whatsoever, and the remaining 2 probably get palliative chemo. So that's how dire the statistics are.
And I know I looked at your Purple Rainbow website and all the fantastic work that you've been doing, and I was interested in that, in terms of, although it's typically, sadly, such a short journey, the different people in terms of the family carers, the wives, the spouses and so on, but there is still the variation between people at different stages of that journey and how it feels to be perhaps the one that survives, or, you know, I think with anything it's a case of differentiating, isn't it, and finding what matters to that person personally.
Yeah, and part of the struggle with the disease is that people kind of get a diagnosis, look on Google and get all those dire statistics. There is lots of research going on, and we're close to a breakthrough, we think, on a number of fronts, from biomarkers, from urine, from blood tests, from vaccines. We're getting close to something that will give us a breakthrough, but to be able to get that breakthrough, we need to raise money for investment in research. And part of the vicious circle that we can't really break is that it gets a minimal amount of funding compared to other diseases, cancers like breast cancer and colorectal cancer, where over the last 20 years they have made breakthroughs because of that investment. And then we also have the issue of young researchers not necessarily wanting to go into pancreatic cancer research because there isn't the investment. So you kind of end up with this vicious circle of no improvement. But for people diagnosed, The journey is often short. It's traumatic for the person who's diagnosed and for the family who get this shock diagnosis like Seth and I got. So he was at work on Monday at 4:30 feeling unwell. By Tuesday at 4:30 he was told he was dying and he'd got days, maybe weeks to live.
That's so shocking. But it is good to hear that there's hope, because I didn't really know that. And is that where the Hope Network, is that where that...
No, that's completely separate. That's
Okay.
So I feel like I've got two parts to me. Well, I've probably got three actually, but
I think you've got several, yeah.
yeah. There's Lesley the person, there's Lesley the wife of Seth who died from pancreatic cancer and the voluntary work that I do. And then there's the work that I do at NHS England in a paid role, which is around experience of care. So Lesley the person loves to read, do history, loves a lovely little dog called Gertie, who's a Staffordshire Bull Terrier, who's a cross between an angel and a demon, depending on the day.
I've seen some of your tweets about Gertie, is it? Gertie tweets, I was saying, yeah.
Gertie, yeah, yeah. She's delightful but demonic as well. There's Lesley who does this work around pancreatic cancer, psychosocial support for people who are diagnosed with a late stage diagnosis and a short prognosis, and improving end of life care. And that really came from working in the NHS at the time Seth was diagnosed, being a reasonably articulate, assertive, vaguely knowledgeable person around the periphery of the NHS system, and getting up every day in the role that I did then, which was in a commissioning support unit supporting clinical commissioning groups and running workshops and working with people with lived experience and saying, share your experience with us because we want to improve things. It's really important that we hear what you've got to say, that we work together, that we listen, that we work with staff. But then what happened was Seth got this diagnosis, and all these things that I talked about family and person-centred care didn't seem to apply to Seth and me. So the fact that he got a diagnosis that was terminal, and it was pancreatic cancer, and there isn't always a great deal of hope. There was this kind of mixture between being told the news and it felt like everybody walked away from us. It felt like there was an element of nihilism.
Really?
And then as we went through the journey, Seth and I were really clear that he wanted to die at home. But despite our best efforts, the system took over. So when Seth deteriorated and there was a build-up of fluid in his abdomen, he needed to be admitted to hospital to get that drained because it couldn't be drained at home. And once he was in the hospital, it was almost impossible to get him out. Nobody really listened. Nobody really talked about what we wanted.
Yeah.
I talked to the hospital about a Pleurex catheter that would drain the fluid at home. They said no. I quoted nice guidance. They said no. Eventually they said yes, but we don't have community nurses available to administer it. I said train me. But by then 10 days had slipped by.
Yes.
Seth was actively dying and it was actually too late for a Pleurex catheter. So sadly Seth ended up dying in an acute hospital when he wanted to be at home, because the weight of the system and the processes just subsumed us. And despite, as I say, being reasonably articulate, reasonably assertive and reasonably intelligent, when you're given that news, all that just disappears away and you rely on the system to support you, but actually it couldn't. So after Seth died, I'd kind of sat for days by his bedside watching him die and just kind of thought, people have to know what it's like to be Seth and to be me in this situation. And there I kind of came up with these three things that I was going to do afterwards. I was going to raise awareness of the signs and symptoms of pancreatic cancer. I was going to help people understand what it's like to get a late stage diagnosis with a short prognosis and the psychosocial support that you need to be able to deal with that, both as a carer and a patient and the person who's dying, and to improve end of life care. So 6 months after Seth died, I got his medical records. I sat down in a room for a week. I went through them. I started to write down what happened on each of the 33 days from the point of his diagnosis until he died, just to make sense of it, because I was traumatized by what had happened. I couldn't believe that 6 months on, Seth had disappeared in 33 days. And what I found myself doing at that point in time was writing letters that accompanied the journey, that were to various healthcare professionals saying what it felt like to be me, to be Seth, or to be both of us on certain of those days. So I ended up with a kind of folder that was the journey of what happened on each of the days, and 17 letters that were in envelopes that articulated what it felt like. So I shared those with the clinical commissioning group who commissioned the care and the hospital that provided the care, and said, this isn't about the work that I do, this isn't about what I do professionally, this is my experience of accompanying my husband through diagnosis to death. These are all the issues around compassion, person-centeredness, family-centeredness, support. What can we do as a hospital, a commissioner, and a carer to improve things? There were many, many good intentions, but sadly, 8 months after sharing that, no one came back to me and nothing changed, which was when I then worked with the National Council for Palliative Care, which eventually was subsumed by Hospice UK, and we worked together with a playwright to take the journey and the letters, and that's how the film and the play came about. The play was called Homeward Bound. We launched that in 2016, worked with lots of hospitals and organisations to share that at end-of-life conferences and improvement conferences. And then through 2017, in partnership with Leeds Teaching Hospital, NHS England, St Giles Hospice, the National Council for Palliative Care, and Pancreatic Cancer UK, turned Homeward Bound the play into Seth's story, the film. So the film made it more accessible, and we developed an educational resource. And the three purposes, which was raise awareness, psychosocial support, and improve end-of-life care, drove that film. And in 2016, I left the NHS because actually I'd stood up every day and said, please share your experiences, please tell me what it's like, because we want to improve things. And then when I shared my experience, nothing really changed. So I went and did some work separately from the NHS around improving end-of-life care and signs and symptoms. And then kind of got to the point where this woman who stood up in front of playing the film at a conference and talked about Seth and what happened, this woman who was there didn't feel like me anymore. It felt like it was a version of me that was just talking about what happened to Seth, and I felt like I was actually losing my connection with Seth. So decided that I couldn't do that anymore, and took a temporary job with NHS Improvement, doing work with providers around improving experience of care. And then through the merger with NHS England and Improvement, took on a substantive post to continue to do that. So since 2018, I've worked in the National Experience of Care team doing that work. It's really important to me to do that work with providers who deliver point of care experiences. And you mentioned the Hope Network earlier. The Hope Network is the Heads of Patient Experience Network that is funded by NHS England, and I, with others in the team, lead that network to bring together the people who lead on experience of care, patient experience, staff experience in hospitals and other organisations, because we've got a big band of people now in that network. So it started off in 2020 at the start of the pandemic with 250 members. We've now got 760 members. Not all of them are from hospitals, but it brings together a network of people who work in ambulance trusts, acute hospitals, community trusts and mental health trusts, to really share the work that they do, to learn from each other. And we meet every 2 weeks online. We do monthly webinars. We do quarterly meetings. We've got a meeting tomorrow, and we support things like Experience of Care Week, which is over in April next year.
Yeah.
And it's just the most wonderful network of people who care passionately about people's experience of care, whether it's patient experience, staff experience, or carer experience. And they're wonderful people who support each other to improve things. So that's where the kind of Hope Network comes in, from a professional rather than a voluntary.
And what a fantastic name, because we all need hope, don't we? That is the thing that runs through, there'd be nobody in the world who doesn't need hope, and to have a Hope Network with all those amazing people. Lesley, that is the most incredible story. I've got so many thoughts going through my head, and I'm thinking, I've just got this picture of an iceberg, in that however much you get to know somebody a little bit, and you get to know aspects of their story, and obviously to prepare for today, I've tried to find out what I can in terms of the Purple Rainbow website and the work and Seth's legacy and so on. But to hear somebody firsthand telling that story of how it fits together, and your professional work and your personal work and the different aspects of you, the person, which can get lost sometimes, can't it, when something like Seth's legacy, if that's what people know about you, obviously that would you'd never have discovered any of that if you hadn't had this terrible experience. I think the things that really jumped out for me were the courage, really, and the tenacity and the emotion it must have taken to go back over that awful story, but to take the time and the love to recall it day by day by day, in terms of how that felt for you and how that felt for Seth. So often we get the summary, the high level stuff, don't we? But to go through something, and it wouldn't just be the separate days, it would be how one thing links to the next, and how the ripple effect, and the fact that they said no at that point, and time's going by, and the one thing you really didn't have is time. And then it's depressing, really, to hear that it's the pattern, isn't it, really, that sometimes, like, good intentions, and people are busy, and perhaps it's not their number one priority, it's your number one priority. To turn that into the kind of legacy that you've made for Seth, I'm sure it needed you personally to do that, because that investment you've got in him and in your story, and to know all that detail in terms of how things could be different day to day. I'm just in awe of you, really. I think it's an incredible story, and you've done, he'd be so proud of you.
Yeah,
and I think we all are.
And it kind of, it started a few weeks after Seth died. I was determined to do something. I didn't know what. I'd got those three things in my mind, so I decided that I would support Pancreatic Cancer UK. And I particularly picked that charity, not because they supported me, because actually I never got the chance to contact them and benefit from all the wonderful services that they've got. But they run a specialist nurse support line for anyone who's diagnosed with pancreatic cancer or any family member. So these are nurses who know this disease inside and out. It's not a nurse, it's a specialist nurse. So they support people with the support line. They kind of lobby and campaign. They also put money into research. So I was determined to raise awareness. So I decided that I would try and raise £1,000 for each year of Seth's life, and raise £49,000 was the idea, which seemed like a good idea at the time, something to reach for and stretch. So I talked about going to China, this planned trip to China. So 15 months after Seth died, and as you can probably see, and anybody who kind of looks on Twitter or sees my profile will see that I'm not really built for trekking the Great Wall of China, but I did a sponsored trek across the Great Wall of China in memory of Seth to raise some money, which was a little bit of a stretch for me, I have to say, but I did it. And when I got to the highest point on the wall, I sprinkled some of Seth's ashes off the wall, because I knew that that connection needed to be there. That raised about £12,000, and then in the following years did lots of work around charity balls, people rode the London to the Brighton bike ride, people ran races, all kinds of things. We did some pottery because I live in Stoke-on-Trent, the home of the pottery. So Emma Bridgewater, people may be familiar with Emma Bridgewater's pottery. They did some special mugs for us that we sold in support of Pancreatic Cancer UK. We sold 2,500 of those, and then some vases and things. So about 5 years after Seth died, I raised the £49,000. But in between,
as quickly as that.
well, it felt like a long time, Gil.
It's a lot of money.
But that was to kind of support the charity and what I'd pledged to do. But then Seth's story in the play Homeward Bound came along as well, and I found myself taken down that route. So about 6 years after Seth died, I then kind of switched the focus away from the fundraising and the awareness raising and got much more involved in the research side of things. So currently sort of work with the National Cancer Research Institute, the European Oncology Trial, all kinds of organisations around really trying to get to grips and shape the research agenda for pancreatic cancer. Been very much involved in something called Precision Panc, which is about tailoring treatments to the particular molecular makeup of the pancreatic cancer because it can be very different. So I've spent the last sort of 3 years very much immersed in the research world and really pushing that agenda. And then also really pushing the agenda in research, not only from a clinical point of view, but also from a kind of psychosocial point of view. And how do we support people who get these diagnoses from a psychosocial point of view? What support is available for patients and families? And even the people who get the operation, the Whipple's operation, which is an enormous operation usually to reconfigure the internal plumbing of your digestive system, removing parts of it and reconnecting it. Even people who get that operation often get recurrence of the disease. So how do we support people? Yeah. And also, how do we support the few people who survive the disease, the 1% who go on for 10 years afterwards, who, want to support the awareness raising, but actually feel terribly guilty that they survived and so many other people died.
1%.
So there's a real burden from the people who survive about why have they survived, and that's often quite difficult because when you work voluntarily in this field, you come across people who have just been diagnosed, who may be kind of going straight to palliative care, people who've got the possibility of an operation and treatment, people who've maybe had a recurrence, and then people who've kind of survived the disease and are moving forward. So it's really tricky to be in a world where there are so many possibilities and somebody else's hope is someone else's no hope for someone else, if that makes sense.
No hope, yeah. But it sounds as if you're really making headway. I mean, I didn't know that in terms of research and so on, and the fact that you're bringing in the human aspects as well, because research can be so medical, can't it? And the whole focus normally is on the science and the microbiology or whatever. But the fact that as I heard it, you weren't able to benefit from Pancreatic Cancer UK yourselves because I guess just to know enough about it and to be able to access that specialist nurse within that time when you're just focusing on Seth and what's happening in your life's kind of falling apart, really.
Yeah.
So often I find a lot in my work that the perfect service is out there and the people who desperately need it are out there, but to match the two is really a challenge, isn't it, in so many different areas.
And like last week I did NHS England kindly give me volunteer time to volunteer to help if it's in a kind of health context. So I do regular sort of carers cuppers with Pancreatic Cancer UK, where me and another person who's got lived experience, who sadly her partner also died, meet with people who are caring for someone with pancreatic cancer, and just provide that peer support around how do we deal with chemo? How do we have the conversation about the fact that we both
Yeah.
know
Yeah.
our loved one is going to die, but we don't want to face it. We don't want to have that conversation about funerals and planning and wills and all those things that come up that people may or may not have in place. And, that feels, sometimes it's awfully sad to hear people still going through the same things that both me and the other lady encountered 8 years ago now. But it's also humbling
Yes.
to know that some of your shared experience might just help someone broker a conversation or connect to the right place to just make things a little less traumatic.
And I mean, don't answer this if you don't want to. I was wondering how you find that personally. I mean, I would guess it must be very rewarding. I would guess that you make some incredible relationships and friendships through it, but it must also be hard on you to keep kind of like revisiting, or how does that work out for you personally?
I think it depends on the day, to be honest. And
Yeah, yeah,
through doing some of the things around Seth's legacy on Twitter, and Seth's legacy kind of grew out of doing that fundraising and awareness work, and then the film and the play, and it became these two words that I pledged every time I wrote pancreatic cancer, because I hate the two words, that every time I wrote that, I would balance it with hashtag Seth's legacy as a positive to balance
right,
it out,
yes,
so that there was some kind of positive purpose. So through the work on Twitter and with the website and various other things, I randomly get people telling me of their loved one's diagnosis. And some days that's terribly, terribly tough to just get a stranger who wants to share this awful news with you. But other days
yeah,
that's awfully inspiring as well, because actually they don't know me, they just know this kind of face on Twitter and the tweets that go out there. And it's a hugely humbling and privileged place to be, that you feel someone feels enough of a connection to share something life changing.
yeah, yeah. Thank you, Lesley, for sharing Seth's story, your story together, what you've done since. I really, really hope that this podcast, I mean, I know there's loads of stuff out there. You've done so well in raising awareness. And, I'd recommend the Purple Rainbow podcast series that you did, was it last year? So many different aspects.
Yeah, we're just finishing off this year, so we're hoping for maybe one a day,
Oh, yeah.
but maybe there'll be slightly less than one a day, but finalising that this afternoon.
I've got no idea how you do one a day.
I've,
Um, I'll get told off if I start mentioning one a day, because I get told off. I've gone from weekly to fortnightly with my series, just in terms of they take a lot of time, don't they, to put together and get the right people and keep the energy and so on.
but I've got the most fantastic aide with that, Charlotte Foster, who way back in the day when I did that trek of the Great Wall was a local reporter on BBC Radio Stoke, who interviewed me before I went and when I came back. And then Charlotte left that post and set up a podcasting business and has supported me with the podcast ever since. So
Oh, fantastic. Yeah.
since 2017, we've been doing the podcast, and that was the connection that we made through that kind of interview about going to China.
So obviously I can, and I will, include links to all of those things as best I can. And if you've got specific things you want me to include, just drop them over. And I think that's what my podcast is trying to do, just meet these inspirational people, find out about them as people and chat to them. And then people who are interested in that subject area can go into more detail and link to your podcast and so on. I mean, it's just amazing, really. I didn't know quite what I was doing when I started the podcast series, but I'm just thinking of the links and the threads that are running through the series, and the number of people who've taken their own experience and done something extraordinary with it. So I spoke to Yvonne Newbold, who set up Newbold Hope, a very recent one with Sarah Land, who set up Peeps HIE. And these are people who are not just telling their stories, but they're setting up, as you've done, legacies, foundations, charities. And I'm hoping that me being able to sort of spark people's interest and also to link people up across the podcast series. I think I need to plan some sort of wild podcast party where we bring these people together, you know, the ones that can attend, because the networking is really something special, isn't it?
Yeah, and people talk about, you know, what happens to you shapes what you do. So, you know, we talked about the HOPE network, the Heads of Patient Experience network, and we've been doing some really fantastic work there around training some of the heads of patient experience how to do digital stories, how to record first person stories, how to get those into organisations, into trusts, and how to really evidence the impact and the outcomes of doing that work. Because often people think, you know, you hear people say, well, it was only one story, that can't be valid. It was only one experience.
Yeah.
But we're actually making some really tangible links between quantitative data, qualitative data, and single narrative stories that connect all that together. So immensely proud of the work of the HOPE network in terms of that storytelling work. And we have a little festival coming up in March if anybody wants to join us. This is Lesley from the professional point of view, not from the voluntary point of view, but some fantastic people who've shared stories in different ways and just trying to build that capacity across providers to be able to tell stories in different ways and affect change.
And I think the episode that people would have to listen to from my podcast series that's relevant there, I mean, as well as all the incredible lived experience stories, Miles Sibley from Patient Experience Library, I just was blown away by talking to Miles, and it's a podcast that I keep banging on about because I can talk about how important patient stories are, but I can't back that up scientifically. Miles has actually gone into it and has got research and evidence and so much information there in terms of why patient stories are so important. And part of our discussion was things around the language and the fact that you talk about medical reports, but patient stories. You talk about serious incidents, but you talk about complaints, and the imbalance in the language. And to have someone as clever as Miles and as research and evidence-based being able to explain why that matters and how it matters and to actually evidence it, I thought was extraordinary. And another episode which I think you'll love, it's Professor Catherine Crock. She's the founder of the Hush Foundation in Melbourne, which is an extraordinary organisation around kindness and around using music in particular, but also plays that have been shown across Australia, very similar to what you're doing with Seth's Legacy. So again, I can see these different strands threading through, and I love it when people, you know, the different contributors connect with each other, you know, completely independent of me, and then the ripple effect. It's just the practical things that you can do together, but also I think the friendship and the community and just making people a little bit stronger together.
Definitely. And there are so many people out there doing such good work that you don't always get to hear about, do you?
So by the time we put this episode out, Kath will have had her Gathering of Kindness in Australia, and it's part of the network that also links with Dr. Bob Klaber, another one of my podcast guests in the UK. And we're hoping to have some kind of Gathering of Kindness in the UK. So you can just feel these different strands. There was Sue Robbins in Canada launching the Gathering of Kindness in Canada. And she's the mum of a young man with Down syndrome. And I've linked her to Nicola Enoch, who's the founder of Positive About Down syndrome in the UK. And very excitingly, as we're actually recording this, Rishi Sunak started as Prime Minister yesterday, and there was Nicola and a couple of young people with Down syndrome in Parliament meeting him on his very first day as Prime Minister. So that's the kind of extraordinary people that basically we know, don't we?
Yeah.
And the more we come together, I think, different specific things that people are interested in, but the commonality of human beings and patient experience, lived experience, but as part of your actual life, rather than as if the NHS and your actual sort of medical needs are, you want those to kind of fit into just getting on with your life, don't you, as best you can?
Definitely, definitely. And we just need to listen to what's important to people and do something with it. Really just,
Yeah, that's the theme, isn't it?
yeah, just really listen to what's important to someone. Whether it's how strong the tea is
Yeah.
when they get tea from the tea trolley, or which person is the person that they need at the side when they're in hospital, who's the care partner, what is it that's important to that person.
And you get, it links to perhaps some of my work around dementia care. If you get somebody perhaps really upset, they're given a cup of tea and they throw it or something, but actually you hate, and you've hated all your life, really milky tea or cold tea or whatever it is, and that's probably your one of the few pleasures that you could really look forward to in a day, possibly. And then, on the other side of the scale, you get like really creative people, and they can be, it's not anything to do with your professional role, it's just to do with humanity and people who get it. And a lovely story I heard about a girl who went off to B&Q and got a colour chart and showed the different shades, and this guy just sort of banged on one, and after that problem was solved. It was just way too weak. He liked really strong tea.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's sharing stories, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Well, thank you, Lesley. Was there anything else that we haven't covered?
No, I think there was a lot there, wasn't there, Jill?
There was a lot there. Yeah. I think the way that you told the story, because these stories are hard to tell, and I'm hoping that for someone who doesn't know about you and who doesn't know about Seth and your legacy, I thought it was just the most brilliant way of piecing it together and making sense for people. So thank you so much.
No, thank you. And it's really good to meet you on a screen.
Well, hopefully we'll meet in person one day. I hope you have enjoyed this episode. If so, please subscribe now to hear more of these fascinating conversations on your favourite podcast platform, and please leave a review. I tweet as Whose Shoes. Thank you for being on this journey with me, and let's hope that together we can make a difference.